You're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council for the 12th of July, 2022. We have most of our councilors here tonight. We have one person who may join us a little bit later, and we have staff here as well. And we would also like to welcome those of you at home who have chosen to join us via YouTube. And as always, when the meeting is concluded, if you are watching from home, you will have an opportunity to ask a question on any topic that is discussed tonight. Just before we start, I would remind you that there's going to be a town-wide water shutoff tonight at 10 p.m. And then that shutoff will continue until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And the shutoff is necessary as we continue to work on connecting the new nursing home project up on Main Street. Directions for you to know what to do before, during, and after the shutoff are on the notice that was received in the mail last week. And it can also be found on the town's website on the water wastewater page. So good luck with that. We'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered tonight in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Tonight, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. With that, we will call the meeting to order. Good evening, members of council and staff. You have an agenda that was emailed out to you. What is your will for the agenda?
I move that it be approved as presented.
Thank you. Councillor Carver seconds. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go right to the minutes of the special meeting of June 24th, 2022.
Mayor, they looked in good order, and I move that we accept the minutes of the special meeting as presented.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Now. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. And now the regular meeting of June 30th, 2022. Councillor Carver.
I move that we let somebody else do it while I adjust mine.
Councillor Carver, I think is moving to.
Because I went up to mute.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
As I move that the minutes of June 30th, 2022 be accepted as circulated.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick seconds. Oh, how soon we forget, Councillor Burdick. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. We have no presentations tonight. We have two pieces of correspondence. 4.1. Someone wish to, Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I guess maybe just to move this along, I think these are reasonable requests, and I'd move that that staff works with the marina folks to find a location on town land at the Government Wharf to facilitate the installation of one of the, what do we call it? One of the kindness streets.
And do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver?
Just to speak to this topic, Mayor, if you'd indulge me for a minute. So, I think these have been pretty widely successful, though who knows down the road how many people are going to be walking around with pocket change, down the road. It's been a long time since I've had tooties and loonies in my pocket. But I mean, I think it's, I think these initiatives have been successful. As we've talked about before, when we're talking about the meters on town property, we've tried to ensure that there wasn't a monopoly of the best sites by one particular organization. So while I think this is this is a terrific application and we should proceed. I mean, we should contemplate some kind of a policy where we can ensure that the optimized sites, different organizations have an opportunity to use that particular site. So we can't really have 9 of these meters all on the government wharf next to one another, but just based on space constraints. But you know, this is a worthy organization. We should probably move this along. I mean, you can see down the road why another community organization might also want to have to take advantage of a similar town property.
Do we have a fire department? Yeah. Where's that meter? Yeah,
Ours is next to the barn.
yeah, okay.
We need to get the tackle.
Counselor Bird.
I just have a question because I think I wasn't here when they were first installed. So are they the responsibility of the foundation or the town in terms of the cost of? I'm all for it, but I'm just curious who.
The
who pays for it.
foundation that we provides
Okay.
and installs
Okay.
the meters. I personally have a little difficulty with this. We have 5 churches in Mahone Bay, not 3. And I find it difficult to provide ongoing support of the town for 3 of the 5 churches, or for that matter, for churches at all, because there are a lot of people who don't go to church, don't profess to go to church. And anyway, I struggle with the appropriateness of the town choosing to support these 3 churches foundation. And perhaps going forward, if we're going to develop a policy, we can look at how we can spread out the joy of these meters, if you will. Councillor No?
I can agree that we have to watch what we do with the churches and that type of thing. But with these meters, it's the people's choice whether they feed them or whether they don't. So we're not actually financially
Yeah.
supporting it. We're just allowing them to put in the meters, and it's everybody's choice as to whether they want to drop in any money into these meters or not.
Fair point. Councillor Feeney, did you have a?
I think we're all on the same page as far as I just think when it comes to the installation of these fundraising devices on the kindness meters on town property, we should just contemplate developing a policy down the road where different organizations can get access to that site for a moment in time. So, you know, I think it's fairer if different organizations can be the charity of the month or the charity of the year, or the charity of the 6 month or the charity of the season. If the location is on town property and it would be viewed as a high traffic area. Anyway,
Okay.
other than that, we can deal with that next year.
Councillor Wilson, did you have a comment?
Only insofar as regarding the churches 3 versus 5. I try to put it in the context of the way I think about it, which is that irrespective of what those buildings are used for or would be used for, they're the icon that defines this town. It's one of the most famous photographs in Canada. And I know, as far as I know, the 3 Churches Foundation is exclusively dedicated to maintaining that streetscape. It has nothing to do with promoting the Anglican religion, for example.
I disagree with that.
You disagree with that, the purpose?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah. I am aware of an individual who was approached to participate in the 3 Churches Foundation as a volunteer, only to be denied, rebuffed, refused, when it was discovered that this person was not an adherent of any church.
That's probably why they didn't take me in.
Could be. Councillor Carter, did you have a comment?
I fully support Councillor Feeney's comments in terms of finding a policy or a process that would make it fair, a fair distribution of the privilege of putting a kindness meter on town-owned property, and that having that kind of policy in place would address the issue of the Three Churches Foundation, which is a community volunteer organization, just like any Mahone Bay Center or any other organization in town. So so I would support how developing a policy. And should we refer it to the policy and strategy committee? In fact?
I agree that we should have a policy, and like I say, we can discuss this more once we go to that policy. But we have to look back on it too, is who's bearing the cost for the purchase of the meters and installing them? That we can't just go and say, okay, we're taking your meter and gonna give it to so-and-so for the next.
Oh, I
month.
don't think we would ever do that.
No, I'm just saying, if we're gonna say the meters on town property,
Yeah.
we have to look at who purchased and initially installed.
I don't think we need to belabor the point
No.
tonight, but just the installation of a parking meter, the town's not providing them an easement, a 2x2 foot easement. I mean, so I mean, I think that the CAO and the staff are, completely capable of making sure that the installation of the meter wouldn't be in a location that was objectionable. So I'm sure that the marina folks don't want it in the middle of the parking lot. So I think we're probably in the right place. And if we wanted to sunset it and say for the year or until 2025, that would be fine too. But I'm just suggesting that we can revisit it when we gather together all of the information, sometime in the next year or so as this gets prioritized. It's far down the
Want to
list.
make a motion on this request?
I think the motion was
It's already
made.
made.
Oh, you made it, that's right.
I
Okay,
think
so we would have to have a second motion to refer it to the policy. Okay, so let's go with Councillor Fee's motion.
Now, these are just for the first two, right, the work two. Am I correct in that, or did you make it for the whole?
I thought the request was for a meter at the wharf, isn't it?
Yeah, with the, and there's
And
two other
it'll
ones,
be
too.
a-
There's 4 meters altogether they want to put in.
No, those were just.
Just 2 on the town, but.
There's 4 pictures, but
Yeah.
the actual request is just one at the marina. And then
Okay.
they've actually already received permission from BMO to put one in the parking lot.
Yeah.
I would see that.
I would-
We can-
okay,
So this is voted on, but
Yeah,
I'd see
that's
that
a
as
BMO
the
property.
administrative.
So there, I'm just gonna focus on the meter at the marina on town
Town
property.
property, yeah, okay. So, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried.
So as a follow-up, I would like to make a motion to refer to the Policy and Strategy Committee for discussion of developing a policy for the placement of kindness meters on town property.
Okay, we have a seconder, Councillor Burdick. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried, thank you.
Brings back a little bit of memory of 2018 when the request initially came in. I think we had the same conversation about policy then, but it's a different group of people around the table.
I don't recall the notion at the first request that we would end up with as many meters as in fact we do have in town now.
So to the other part of the letter, I don't think it requires a motion, but I just wanted to make sure everyone's comfortable with. I actually think the idea of attaching it to the bollard rather than having it freestanding is better.
Yeah.
For snow removal, I think it'd be preferable for us, so. Just want to make sure there's no objections, I'll let her know that's.
Okay. All right, second correspondence action item is a letter from Kathy Gadet of the Scarecrow Festival requesting the rental of the old fire hall club room. Councillor Carter.
Well, I have a question about, does this need council consent? I mean, I sort of think this is sort of an operational issue rather than a governance issue. So
I definitely
Mr. Hunter?
wouldn't accept a rental without council direction, like just because the building is vacant doesn't mean that we're, doing that kind of thing with it. Now, I guess don't have any immediate concern about this request. It does cross over with the fire department still moving stuff out and our cleaning of the building, but they're only looking for the club room, so imagine the club room can be accommodated. If council does decide to, want to be showing the building for sale or taking any other steps with respect to the building, this is a limited time frame duration. I don't think it's going to be too much in the way of interference with that. probably can have interested parties come through the building if we go that way, even with this activity going on. So I wouldn't immediately speak against it. I didn't want to run it by our juror, but I would think council would have to direct staff to look into it or to support it, or just because it's not being used for the fire department doesn't mean we would necessarily assume it was available for other users.
Mayor, if I'd move that we defer item 4.2 until the second meeting of July to give staff, I guess, some more time to make some inquiries, and then maybe council can go, but also ask questions from staff to figure out what our policy would be. I think we don't want to haphazardly back into renting out a facility that hasn't yet been deemed surplus. And although I think, it's probably easy to accommodate this, I think it'd be better if we have a couple paragraphs from staff on the pros and cons, and whether we logistically could do it, and whether there's any legal or insurance, who has keys to the building, those kinds of questions.
I would also be curious to know whether or not there's any plan to store these properties, the scarecrow pieces, in this building beyond the end of the festival.
Two things. One, I think Councilor Feeney's prepared a motion to instruct staff to look into the insurance and other ramifications of this proposal,
Okay,
which I'd be happy to second.
all right.
And clearly they
So
want,
now we're on the question.
clearly they want it long term if they can get it, which would imply the storage part.
It would seem to,
It seems like that's.
yeah.
I know that they approached the United Church, we're using the lower them this hall, once it's cleared out, because there's a group in there now. But they want to store the scarecrows and everything in there, so I'm assuming that this would be the same.
Councilor Burdick?
My sense from the letter is if that might be the case, but they're asking explicitly about those 3 months. So, yeah, and that's sort of the terms that we
August,
can sort of
September.
think about. And that would be my question too, would be insurance, really. Like,
Yeah.
is that even a possibility? But other than that, I wouldn't have.
So in conversation with Scarecrow Festival, they are specifically looking for a place for the summer. They do have another site that is lined up for, and off the top of my head, I can't recall, I believe it's in the fall, they expect it to be available to them. But as Councillor Burdick said, if this space, if council would consider renting this on a long-term basis, it'd be very interested in having this discussion because it is all on one level and that sort of thing. So you're exactly right, Councillor Burdick, in the assessment of the request, and it's a short-term request, but also they'd be very interested in council would be. Right.
Okay. Anything else on the question? You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.
So we'll report back to the meeting on the 28th. And then if council is agreeable at that time, based on the information at hand, the term would be August 1st through September 30th. That's what we're looking at.
On the first of September. Yes. Notwithstanding any request to have a longer term arrangement.
Yes, well, I think we'd just be extremely explicit in this
Yeah.
case that we're only talking about the 2 months.
Yeah.
During which time council will have a decision about.
We're not, we're not stumbling into being a long-term landlord on the back of a 100-word email.
Okay,
So
thank you. That concludes the action items. Let's go to correspondence information items. Councilor Wilson,
Receive and file.
thank you. Seconded by Councilor Now. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to part 6. The infamous short staff report to council.
Well, it is short, it's 13 pages, it's as short as it gets. We'll take any questions, if anyone has any. It's not a whole lot to update between budget meetings right now.
Councilor Wilson?
I have two, I guess they're questions, I don't know, comments. Number 11 is the RFP for legal representation. And I know two things. One, it hasn't been begun. And two, there was some discussion about it today, but I'm wondering if, I feel very uncomfortable when we're kind of in limbo with the situation, with the legal situations that we have. I'd be much happier if we could get some resolution to this issue. And I'm wondering if that's might be forthcoming.
So I guess two things. I wouldn't describe us as being in limbo. I mean, we do have a town solicitor, albeit there are certain files that haven't moved ahead, necessarily as quickly as council like. As far as the RFP for legal services, it's come to my attention, the town of Bridgewater and the district of Lunenburg are also going out to the market for legal services. We're all at the same time. We've had a little preliminary conversation about whether that tender process might be something that could be combined. Now, we don't necessarily all want the same law firm, but we generally all want the same services from a law firm. So either way, there's, we're going to be going out with the same template invariably now that we all know that we're doing it. So nobody's going to want to be the first if we don't share what we know. So, I think that's a catalyst one way or another. It'll help to get that document issued. But once I've had a little bit more exploratory conversation with the other units, we can talk about whether there's an actual possibility of some kind of joint call for proposals. So that's the latest anyway.
Councillor Kirby.
No, that was a really interesting image there, the collaboration. It raised the question in my mind of the possibility of problems coming up if two or three units share the same legal firm. Might there be, even within the same firm, if it's different lawyers, I think there's some challenges about.
Yeah, I think we have to explore that. I mean, the other thing, like I said, is that we can receive proposals from all kinds of different law firms and not all select the same proposal. So it kind of depends how the call for proposals is,
So collaborating on the process, not necessarily on the project.
Yeah, no matter what, we all want the same things out of the municipal solicitor, so.
Same RFP, different.
And then sometimes there's specializations required, so, would there be any issue in all of us having the same human resources lawyer? I don't think so. It just depends on the nature of the services, but it's very preliminary. I just, I think one way or another, we're gonna borrow each other's templates, because that's certainly, it would be an opportunity to waste if we didn't.
Councillor Wilson.
Just had a second question. The number 30 on that list is the Pro Kids thing with MODL. And that's been kind of sitting there forever. And I think at some point, 10 months or so ago, we discussed and agreed that MODL was never going to answer our request. So I guess my question is, why can't we just scrap
Take it
that?
off the list.
Yeah, the way that it's written now is, it really is just a staff to follow up to tell them that it is coming off the list. And it's a fairly low priority item given the nature of it, so we just haven't done it. But I take the point, it should only take a half hour to do, so we'll get this one off the list soon. And as far as the only bit of information that we were waiting on was the grant allocation for the year, and we don't have the grant allocation of ProKids, so that kind of closes the circle in terms of what we have to tell them. But that was already 2 months ago now, so take point taken.
Item number 6, staff to initiate a home charger pilot program for electric vehicle owners under the Grow Load Initiative. Am I safe in assuming that when this plan is fully developed, it's going to come back to this table for
Yes.
implementation approval?
Yeah, our initial thought was that we would do some informal outreach to the known electric vehicle owners in town. Martha did make contact with a number of them
There's a
last year.
study of this week.
So that's where we ended up, is after speaking with some of the known electric vehicle owners, it was kind of determined that there might not be as much of an interest based on the way we initially sort of described the program. A lot of people were kind of skeptical about where the benefit to them as the owner of the EV would lie with that type of a system. So now we're taking it a bit broader. We're going to start with the survey that's out now, gather some more information about the decisions that people make around their EV and their charging decisions, and see if we can maybe recalibrate that program. So we'll definitely be back to council because I think that as it was originally envisioned, I think it would be difficult to get uptake. So,
Yeah. you should-
that conversation.
We've got 8 chargers in town now. Do we have data that tells us how much on the average charge an EV is taking on from our system?
Yeah, you can get that out of the data.
Because we're not charging people for it, as I understand.
No, these are, you have to
Yeah,
pay.
They're pay, are they?
Yeah, and we get a portion of it, and then the company Flow that administers the payment system gets a portion of it.
Okay,
And that's the overall usage is being reported now as one of the monthly reports, task on the monthly report. It's not on this one, that's why this one's only 13 pages, because the stats are on the second one. So we're reporting on that monthly, but there is, that's just an aggregate, there is a more detailed
Okay.
report that we can mine for information like that.
and are the chargers that would be used in the Grow the Load initiative for the individual homeowner, is there a plan to go with a level 2 or level 3 charger to significantly speed up the charge time for the EVs?
There hasn't really been, I mean, I guess, we're currently looking at it a second time, but the issue around home charging is not necessarily in people wanting to be able to charge it faster.
No, it's an overnight thing.
Yeah, or, downtime.
But pulling into the pharmacy or the home base center, it becomes a short-term charge thing.
Yeah, sorry, were you talking about the public station?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is there a plan to upgrade the chargers?
Oh, the public.
Either the
Yeah,
public
okay.
ones or the ones that we will,
So the home ones, they'll be slow chargers, and I think the real question is more around how the property owner, the vehicle owner, the property owner, would benefit from the time of day charging
yeah,
to what we then want them to do, whether it's actually lining up with what they're already doing and why they're already doing it in a certain way versus what we would like them to do. So we need more information about the way you kind of assume it's overnight charging.
yeah,
And depending, overnight is not necessarily when we are, like, you think of most utilities want to have their overnight energy because that's when people's energy goes down.
Mhm.
But depending on when your energy is being produced, once the solar garden's online, we're probably going to be more likely to want people to use energy during the day at times. So, there's different considerations that go into it. To your question about upgrading them, we had a sort of an informal concept that the level 3 charger would be left to the private sector. So essentially the jump from level 2
Because
to
of the
level 3
cost.
is,
Yeah.
it's a magnitude of 10 or more
Mhm.
in price, but also, we'd be in direct competition then with the fast fill service of a gas station. Because this is not really an equivalent service that you don't choose between spending 2 minutes at a pump and plugging in for a few hours. It's not really a choice that somebody would make. This is a different type of activity. But once, the Irving station in town presumably adds an electric pump or two, we would generally assume the private sector would take care of the need for that fast charging activity. And fortunately for the town, and I hope the Irving station puts them in, they're buying our power. So at the end of the day, the electric utility still benefits from that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I had just one. Approve the expenditure of 13,220 or 2250 for the recording of a talk by the town's heritage researcher Deborah Trask, which is, I believe, finished. And
I think like it says on
available.
there, we were just having edits of the credits, the final credits. If that's taken care of, maybe that's done, but as of the time of this reporting, I didn't have that.
It went live today.
Okay.
I know, it's amazing.
It's been received very well.
Folks at home should look for it and take the time to watch it.
When we were setting up this evening, we could see how many hits it's gotten, and it's doing very well.
Good.
People are really enjoying it, so
Good.
we're very happy. It just went live this afternoon. We finally got all the kinks worked out, and we're very happy.
We
Should
should
doesn't promote because anybody who's made it half an hour into the council meeting would, I'm sure, enjoy watching that.
we should maybe think about a letter of thanks or appreciation to Ms. Trask for the work that she did. I realize she was paid for it, but still, It's a labor of love on her part.
Notice, I think there was a social media post on that today.
Yeah, and it directs people to where it's housed on our YouTube channel, and then it's
Yeah,
linked on our website and all that stuff.
it's great.
On the way to being viral.
There you go. Academy Award time.
And that's a star we can put on the report for next time.
That's right, you can. Anyone have any other questions for this report?
Waiting patiently to talk about the logo again.
Entertain a motion to receive for information purposes. Moved, seconded, all in favor, motion's carried. Yes.
Sorry,
Oh.
Councilor Carver, if I may. I received a note from the deputy mayor. He's running a little bit, he said he'll be here, if I do my math, probably about 10 minutes. He's asking if we can move the amended draft public participation plan down further in the agenda so he can be here for that discussion. He had a lot to say on that last week. If that's
Okay, all right, we're agreed.
As long as we don't finish the whole meeting before he gets here.
Let's go to the option to discharge the development agreement. No, we'll be here for a while. For 995 Main Street.
Mary, just had a couple questions on this.
Mhm.
So, after Councilor Carver refreshed my memory on the original discussion in 2019, it strikes me that there's a real benefit to having the 18-month sunset clauses that was well discussed and debated at the time. So I'm all for amending the DA to provide a new sunset clause, but I'm a little reticent to just simply say, we're going to do nothing and let it unfold into, never land. The second item is when we move to that process, the timing of the 18 months, which I think is a really good idea. And we see some of the challenges they've had in Lunenburg, where they've had development agreements with 10-year sunset clauses, and then, developers coming back a decade later and wanting to, change things up. One of the rationales was because we'd eliminate the arbitrage that would occur based on a developer coming in, really tasking our staff time to get a DA in place, knowing that it was really around the land plus the DA would have more value than the land as a standalone. So it was there's a whole business behind getting the DAs through. And I think that the sunset clause did a nice job of trying to work that. So this is a DA that, based on the sunset clause, did end in January 2021. But my question here is, I think it was never contemplated that council would have to take further action when the sunset is incurred. And so from a process perspective, as we would do this in the future, I'd want to have a process where when the clock strikes 12 after 18 months, there is no requirement for the town to actually declare that the DA is no longer in force. So in this particular situation, it's easy to be helpful, and that's where my head would be. I mean, why wouldn't we give these folks an opportunity to put their project together, which looks remarkably similar to the original DA? I certainly have no problem with doing that. I think we should probably try to figure out a way to do that, and that's certainly Garth's recommendation to council. But I don't think it should be open-ended in the context of, if we do nothing, I don't want this to come back 4 years from now and saying, oh, well, we were told, we just didn't take any action after September 2021, September 2022, September 2024. So if we're going to provide an extended window, let's just do that. Let's just give the folks as much, let's give them another 18 months if that's what they require. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilor Berger?
Yeah, it was an interesting document to read, because that was my question also. It's well, if I support, extending it, especially given the fact that COVID happened, and so difficulty in maybe if that was a factor for them. But at what point is it, is it just indefinitely open-ended then, or is there a way of indicating a limit? do we give them 2 consecutive time periods? Or it just seems like the purpose of having the dates is that there are dates of, to pay attention to.
Councillor Wilson.
Oh, sorry to that. Yes, 16.2, as I understand it, says the council of the town may discharge the agreement if it runs out of clock.
May.
May,
Mhm.
and if you don't, it stays open until council does. So in that respect, it is open-ended. And Councilor Green, I guess the suggestion is that this document be redone so that it doesn't, so it says will or words to that effect.
Well, I don't want to drive an immense amount of work for the homeowner or the planners or staff to get us to the same place that we might inevitably get to. But I think it was just the idea that when we craft, the next time around, the next DA, I'd be more in tune on that with that kind of a clause that we should just have it explicitly say, oh no, the DA ends if you don't take advantage of it at a certain date, which I believe was the real intent behind why you have the sunset. Because, right, that's the whole purpose, right?
But that's not what it says.
No, fair enough. I totally agree. I'm just suggesting that I can live with it and move on, but if it's, I'd prefer not to.
CAO and then Councillor Now.
I think, if we're looking to amend the language next time around with the DA, we'd simply say council may extend, we can have any kind of wording that we want to. So council may discharge or may extend for a further 18 months, like we can come up with language to that effect. I think the question right now would be, since the agreement is written the way it is, and it does leave it open-ended, can council bind itself to allow them a defined amount of time prior to exercising council's existing authority to go ahead and pull it? So if council were to resolve, the council shall allow for a further 18 months from today's date, for example, then it's council who would have to come back and rescind that. But that's better than the notion that council could, on a whim, at any given meeting, discharge. It provides some level of, guarantee to the property owner, at least as far as council goes. Also, 18 months from now will be, if I'm doing the math right, within the term of the next council, it's hard to believe. So if that's the case, then that also.
No, still in this term.
Oh, okay, yes, it'll be a year and so it'll still be the same group of people around the table come that time. Yeah, because you're a different group than granted the original one, so it is fairly significant that this group might look at it differently. But if you're willing to give them further time, I know one of the factors that this particular property owner has been hung up by is their repeated entreaties to the town to extend water and wastewater services to the property.
That's
Which
another
we have,
matter too, right?
we have, the status of that is, in the works, and it's in our budget discussions coming up, and so that's probably also a factor. in terms of why they haven't done it.
Well, like in the absence of having Garth here or the property owner here to advocate for themselves, I think that's a reasonable accommodation to. I didn't quite have that language as elegantly crafted as Dylan suggested, but I think that's the way to go, just to basically have a motion tonight that extends the it basically says we're not going to terminate the DA for another 18 months.
Yeah.
And then it'll get kicked down the road.
That was my question. Can we legally extend for another 18 months? That gives them that 18 months to do whatever.
I'm no lawyer, but I don't think you can, because what it says is that you have 18 months and council may terminate after 18 months, but we also may not. It doesn't say anything about extending for another 18 months.
No, I think we would just have a motion tonight that says if we're going to not extend it 18 months from now.
That we're not going to.
That the council will revisit this 18 months from now. And if the DA is not up and running and there's not piles and concrete and construction activity, then we would rescind it at that point.
Yeah, maybe the council resolved not to discharge the DA for a further period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just council resolving not to exercise that power. It doesn't mean council can't technically change its mind, you just have to have new information to revisit.
To be fair to the
motion.
homeowner, you don't want a random council coming in 6 months from now and saying, I'm putting a motion on the table to cancel the DA.
No, that's right.
Right? Like,
And
if
as
you're
a
the
C-
homeowner, that would be a bad day.
As the CAO suggested, the fact that the property owner has been asking the town repeatedly to schedule for either an extension of the water and sewer or a decision to not extend the water and sewer.
I mean,
Because
I think we're
that's
being,
what
to
you-
be frank, I think we're being quite charitable. This is an excellent accommodation. I mean, it's been 3 years. I mean, everyone knew by the fall of 2020 that this was not good, we weren't gonna see boom trucks in here. I mean, so for it to show up now and saying, well, my project's been delayed because of COVID is, you gotta take that with the intent it's given, but I still think we can afford to be charitable tonight, and let's move it along.
Do you want to make the motion that council not take action
Yeah, for 18 more months.
for 18
months,
more
yeah.
months? Okay, is that your motion?
Yes.
Do we have a seconder? Councilor, now on the question, Deputy Mayor.
My curiosity was around if the project was being applied for today with the plan Mahone Bay piece was done, will it be approvable?
And so I think under the existing, I think it's under the existing dwellings. It's a basically your grandfather clause. The building's sort of replacing the exact building that was there.
That was there.
historically, yeah.
Yeah.
The Smelser boathouse.
Yeah,
So
there were two properties that were kind of grandfathered in within the open shoreline zone.
Yeah.
And this is one of them. So I think that would have to continue. But the conditions that were placed on it could potentially change.
The height.
Yeah, that could potentially change.
okay. We have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. So the property owner now has 18 months to have it. Okay. Let's go to Deputy Mayor joined us at 7:38. Welcome, Deputy Mayor Kangata. Let's go to item number 6, the amended draft participation plan for the town logo process. CAO?
Yeah, I just comment quickly about the changes that were made, hopefully reflective of council's direction at the last meeting. So the primary direction that we received concerned the formation of a committee that would be essentially a steering committee on the effort to develop a new logo. The way that this has been amended reflects that steering committee would be tasked to come up with the scope, supported by staff, come up with the scope of an RFP. Not that the members have to write the whole thing, but come up with the scope of an RFP that would determine both the process of and scope of work for a contractor to come in and get the information needed from the community to do logo designs, design them, provide them back in whatever format the committee felt was appropriate. And at the end of that process that the committee would undertake, its mandate would be discharged on recommendation of a logo to the council for acceptance. So that's how we wrote this. There's a specification around number of members that was discussed at the last meeting. We don't have anything in here with the criteria for recruitment, and that's usually something council would talk about. But that's generally what we did from the last meeting. Does anybody have any questions, comments, further revisions to suggest?
Councilor Carter.
Yes, what would the staff resourcing be for the committee, particularly in terms of developing an RFP? If the committee's to develop the RFP?
Yeah, it would be my expectation that the committee would indicate, we would like to see the developer undertake a process with a number of meetings, or we'd like to see the developer have, run a survey or do a combination of both things. or, whatever kind of, how broad you want it to be. Maybe we want the proponents to propose their own suggestions for how to get the pulse of the community to, so that's really the brainstorming element at the committee. And then, how many designs do they want to see? How do they want to see the community get to see those designs? All of that conversation, and then staff would have to actually write that into the standard format of a request for proposals for the committee. The committee can look through that, make sure it conforms with what their expectations were. And then staff would also do the publishing of it and, communications to would-be proponents about the scope, and at the end come back, with a collated list of the different components, the proposals attached, and give that to the committee and say, here's the results of your request for proposals. The committee would be the ones to make the determination as to which contractor was selected. That's most of the staff part.
So what complement of staff would be present at the committee or steering team meetings?
Well, I think that's really discretionary for council. I mean, I would generally see staff only be present at those meetings when that is necessary. So in the development of the RFP, for example, generally don't see staff as a participating component of this committee. The notion is to have as much, empowering a group of citizens as possible. And staff are usually acting, as representatives of council and stewards of town resources in those conversations. I would rather that be well understood by the committee members and the chair, and then they can have their conversation. So, yeah.
If I may.
Yes, please.
So taking notes and so on would be the responsibility of committee members rather than a town staff person designated or delegated for that
Like minutes,
purpose.
keeping
Yeah,
minutes.
taking minutes.
And if the committee feels that it would be helpful to have a staff person taking minutes, and they can meet during hours in which a staff person is available, then we can have a staff person potentially to do that. I guess that's, we're just estimating the number of staff hours. We don't know what would be most helpful, but it would be restricted to that type of participation.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Would you have a comment to the mayor?
Yeah, so thank you. I really appreciate you folks delaying this for me. I sent in some comments earlier in the day before I went down to Liverpool. And I think the gist of what we were talking about last time has been captured in what's been proposed. But my suggestion was that we tweak the wording a little bit, so that at least for one thing, there's an indication that there's a co-chairing, where council and a community person co-chair the process, or the steering team. And then the other piece is when we talk about RFP to be developed, the way it's written right now sort of seems to indicate the RFP will be for a designer, and we are in some ways entrusting the designer to be in charge of the community engagement process. Now, probably it's an assumption for me, but community participation and community engagement and logo design, or design and graphic design, are very different skill sets, and getting, you might get somebody who has that in those complementary skills, but I think tasking it to a RFP that's also that definitive might show on us to particular individuals in some ways. I would rather that the committee is heavily involved in having conversations with its designer and coming up with a public or community participation process that council approves, that the designer has input into, so that committee, in many ways, that the way I envision the committee working is that committee holds space for council to ensure that the community needs are actually tapped into, rather than being defined by somebody else. In this particular, in the way it's being designed now, it's sort of town has given an RFP to a designer, you design a community participation process, and you determine how the community will participate, and then bring the process back to council. I would rather the committee and the community in some certain ways, because it's 5 members of the community, determine how the community will be engaged. And so when we're thinking about when we'll be reviewing who's on the committee, you're thinking about skill sets and who's at the table. Do they have the knowledge and ability to be able to see how the community is being reached out? Have they done this before in the past and things like that? So that's the gist of the suggestions I put in place there. I don't know whether staff have seen any conflict in that.
CAO?
Well, I certainly think the notion maybe it isn't a single RFP process, maybe there's more that is needed, is something to consider. I think the notion was that staff are putting a budget in the hands of a group of citizens, or council is putting a budget in the hands of a group of citizens, not expecting staff to be the shepherds of this process, not expecting to follow a standard council committees structure where every recommendation of the committee to expend funds has to be going back to council. You know, what you risk happening if you're gonna have a committee acting as a normal committee of council through recommendation to council to expend funds, which are then stewarded by staff, is you just have the town doing a logo process. We don't really need a committee. I think the committee's kind of not empowered at that point. We're really just, council is doing a logo process. So the notion of saying, you know, the committee would contract resources so as not to use the town, right? So the committee would be able to go out and run its processes without coming back at every step for approval. I think that was the sort of intention of, you know, give them a budget, tell them they go to market, get the services that they need. Maybe it should be rephrased around, you know, run a RFP or RFPs to hire the necessary, you know, people to go out to do this work. Maybe it doesn't have to be one RFP. I think that's a good point, well taken. But the notion that they would, committee recommends to council that we do a survey, staff be instructed to develop the survey, staff bring the survey back to council, like, so we end up right where we've always been. So that was my concern, I guess.
So we would, what I'm hearing you say is that we would use the opportunity with the consultant, with the hired resource, that the persons who are on the committee would be talking with that resource as to what they saw as necessary, appropriate, desirable, whatever, in the way of a logo, and then that person would be expected to take away all of that input.
And if the committee says they need additional input because they want to run some public sessions to hear from people, or
They
they
can
want to
get
do a
back
survey,
and get it from
they would have a contractor, maybe it's the same person who does the drawings, maybe it's not, that isn't really significant, but they would hire someone to go and do that process independently with resources that have been allocated by the town in advance.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I fully agree in terms of that. I guess the question for me, in the way it was crafted, what was presented, for me did not address some of those concerns that I was talking about. So the RFP language speaks to a designer getting the RFP and them being in charge of the public participation process. So I guess the question I have for staff, if you've had a chance to look at the comments I have, is there any of those changes that would introduce a challenge, or that would be, I guess, contradictory to the process? So the only piece I think we talked about last time that we really want to make sure is that the public participation process is council approved, so that we know at least that has been given sort of some very good thought out process, that they don't just do that and then we come and get to the same place where we don't.
So that would be the biggest difference. Like, I would not suggest, I wouldn't recommend council approve the public participation process.
Okay.
I would recommend the committee be charged with coming up with what it feels is the appropriate for public participation process, and then hiring whatever resource was needed to carry it out, and then come back to council and say, this is what we did. This is what we, as the committee that were, you know, brought on to do this, thought was the right thing to do, and this is what we did, and here's what we got out of it. Because if you do come back to council for approval of the public participation process, again, who's really in the driver's seat at that point? You know, we have all kinds of public participation processes that the town runs, and people point to them and say, this wasn't good enough in this way, this didn't capture the right, you know, so why not let the committee actually be responsible for that decision?
Councillor Kerwin?
Just a couple of thoughts. One is that the word designer, I think is very problematic, and a different word or designation could be.
We just say contractor,
Contractor, yeah.
contractor,
And-
contractors, S with a bracket, so that
Right.
it's that's nice and
Yes,
open-ended,
yes, and the bracket. And another thought is, would it helpful to include something about the autonomy, the relative autonomy of this committee and the fact that it isn't going to be functioning the same way as, not in so many words, but that it's a relatively autonomous committee.
More so than any other committee, Councillor Bird?
Yes, as the CAO described a while ago, that it's not, as this committee has been formed or talked about forming, that it's going to have less reporting back to council and the ability to spend its own funds, allocated funds, rather as distinct from the relationship of town committees.
And that's we're calling it a steering team. We were trying to avoid the, well, why is this a committee? Those are committees. So we wouldn't call it a committee.
Steering team, but the autonomy, I think, just in listening was something that struck me as it perhaps important to capture in some of the language.
Councillor Feeney and then
Just-
Councillor Bird.
Just two points briefly, like I think the deputy mayor's edits are fine. I support them if we want to change the engagement document to reflect some of those edits. The other thing is thinking back about the committee, the committee criteria that we used when we did the environmental committee, where we had a few nuances around the jurisdictions. I think could be valuable if we took a similar approach when this committee gets formed. So we may have the world's greatest, retired graphic designer who coincidentally lives in Oakland. And maybe they would like to participate on the committee. They bring certain subject matter expertise. So look, I think we should just not, the committee is only 5 people, but I do think we should make sure that the pool of the interested community, when we're talking about the community in this regard, I think we all know how many emails we had from people that were just outside the community, but they may have subject matter expertise that may improve the process. So in a similar fashion to what we did on the environmental committee, where we basically said you can apply to be on the committee if you're in town or in one of the adjacent municipalities, I think could be wise. Otherwise, we've got 450 people here in February to draw our committee pool from. And we all know it can be somewhat limited if we're looking for scarce skills. Anyway, those are my 2 thoughts.
Okay. Councillor Bird.
Yeah, I need to read your notes, Deputy Mayor, but I think if it's very clear that this is a community-led steering team, if that sort of language can be in there, then it's clear that the directions are coming from the team rather than from council or town itself until it gets to the point of seeking council approval. So yeah, it's just to Councillor Carter's point about autonomy.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I don't mind going, it won't take too long. I don't mind going through the changes I was suggesting. So on page 2 of that document, that talks about the timeline, July to August. There are two bullet points. I was suggesting the first bullet point be council to establish a co-chaired, in brackets, community and council limited time steering committee to oversee the development of a community logo and appoint 2 members of council to this team. So it's basically that same sentence, but ensuring the co-chairship is mentioned. And then the community engagement piece, council to seek 5 community members to sit on this limited time steering team to develop a community logo. The September piece, their steering team to develop and recommend to town council an RFP for a professionally designed community logo. The RFP will include a council-approved public participation process that will ensure robust community engagement in the design and selection of the final logo for council approval. Now, I'm quite okay. I think the reason why I say the public participation process needs to be council approved is because that's a concern that was raised last time when I mentioned this. I don't think we have to bring it to council, but I included it there because a few members of council said we want to see the public participation process. But if we don't want to, we'll be quite again giving that to the committee. But I was just trying to make sure that I bridge all the concerns there. And then on page 4, development of a draft logo. I wanted to phrase that a little bit different and say that steering team to develop and recommend to town council an RFP for a new professionally designed community logo. So rather than say the designer sort of takes charge of even the public participation process, what we want to make sure is that the logo is professionally designed. The process whichever consultant will take, whether it's a designer who does the public participation process or you're getting a public participation professional to do that piece, by using this language doesn't limit us to getting a designer through an RFP process that can do public participation. You can get to, so to speak, and then it's the same thing, just talking about the language that the public participation process needs to be robust and there's public engagement in that process. And then October 22 to January 23, as I just said, the public engagement process needs to have the following outcomes. 1, demonstrated community participation in the process, and then secondly, a professionally designed draft logos that can be given to the steering committee to make a decision. And then in March, council approval, ensure that there's a public hearing on the proposed logo, council decision is done, and then forward the information to budget. And then we're just changing the language on the required resources and costs. So I think it had talked about the 25,000 was for a graphic designer for development of the logo. I was changing that language to RFP for community engagement and logo design, 25,000. So it's not just, I guess, in terms of how you define that. Those are the changes I was suggesting.
So just possibly going a little bit further, we'll see if you would agree, because Councillor Carver, we kind of had a notion of maybe what it would be is, so for September, develop a draft logo. You could say instead of the steering team to release an RFP for designer who's responsible, and you suggested alternative wording there, it may be more like steering team would hire contractors, in brackets, could be one, could be more, to implement public participation program and develop logo designs. Again, designs could be one, could be more. But that sort of, leaves the notion that the committee is expending funds to hire professionals to carry out these tasks, but leaves it more broad. I mean, even the use of an RFP is down to the adherence to the town's existing procurement. Like we can't let the committee go off and violate our procurement policy. So the nature of the procurement activities is probably going to have to be by RFP, but that depends on the type of what's being procured. Maybe somebody wants a facilitator to run a single session. Well, that probably doesn't need to go to RFP. We just get quotes for that. So it all depends on the nature of what's being procured. So I think if we said steering team would hire contractors to implement public participation program and develop logo designs, that would be a broader way to do it, but also doesn't, I think the bigger question of what your revisions here that this doesn't speak to up at the top is, where does council come into it? That's a discussion for, but I think as far as the expenditure of resources, maybe that's sort of a hybrid, if you would agree on that one.
Yeah, quite comfortable what you say there.
Councillor Farrer?
That part of the discussion made me think again about something along the lines of a terms of reference. Something that's an additional item in the public engagement process, or separately somewhere, that describes the terms of reference, the co-chair, the spending responsibility, the accountability, what Mr. Hyde just mentioned, the procurement guidelines, and so on.
I think you could do further revision of this, staff to do further revision of this to include aids for terms of reference.
Yeah.
We're not in a rush to get this engagement plan right. So if we're directed to do that, we can do that. That'll get the co-chairs clarified. It speaks to the as yet undiscussed question of criteria for selection. So Joe was raised this point a little bit.
And then so for me, I'd see this, sorry, Mr. Mayor, if you can go through it. I would see this as sort of two different processes. My assumption was that we can approve this engagement process and triggers staff creating a terms of reference for the committee, so that when you're going out to hire, not to hire, to recruit, including when we're choosing whoever's going to be on council, then those terms of reference will be what will be used for that.
Yeah, you're right. You could do it in 2 steps, but we don't
Yeah.
really have to because we have
Okay.
time if we just wanted to do it at the next meeting.
That makes good sense. Next meeting, it's always, why
Next
make
meeting.
a decision tonight when you?
But
you can
give
do
us
it
the input now,
right
give us the input now about who could be eligible.
Are you comfortable that you, for the direction that staff are getting?
I think
Based on this
what we would
discussion?
need would be a motion that staff be amended to, or be directed to amend the draft engagement plan reflective of council's discussion around the committee and use of town resources, something along those lines would cover our conversation, as well as to include draft terms of reference for the proposed steering team. Again, I think that would cover the conversation that's gone on here. And then you could add, based on continued conversation that we'll hopefully still have, to include criteria for membership and selection criteria, whatever you want to include there.
What he said.
What he said, yeah.
But you can finish the
Deputy
conversation.
CAO is madly. Councilor Crowder and then Deputy Mayor.
Oh, I was making a motion
You're making the motion.
based on what the CAO
Okay,
said.
do we have a seconder on the motion? You second it?
Yeah, I'll second it.
He seconded.
Yeah.
And a question.
And a question.
And I said, okay.
I think one of the things that needs clarification is around that piece of whether or not that the committee will be bringing back a public participation process, because I think you need that clarity when you're doing your terms of reference.
Well, and just in general to even the engagement plan.
Yeah, so I would be comfortable, the committee not having to bring the public participation process to council for approval. Maybe we can say that they will share it with council and council can provide feedback. But I know that there are members of council who probably prefer that it came for approval. So I think it's to move things faster, it might be better for them to be able to make that call. Knowing that we only have, we say we're not rushed for time, but we only have September to
April, refer to March.
to Feb, which is a short time for a proper public participation process, right? So,
Yeah, on the question, Councilor Carver?
Yes, I think it's on the question. If it pertains to the suggestions that the deputy mayor circulated earlier today, there was one word that I questioned, and it was the word final. It said, and I can't find the attachment in my mail setup. So the comment was that the steering team would select the final design and send it to council. And I reacted to the word final in that one. So it could be recommended.
So the way we called it before was a community recommended logo.
Yeah.
And then, it does say final one in parentheses. I don't know if that was intentional.
no, I'm okay with recommended. I guess it's called recommended children, but they will have to come to council with a logo, not 3 logos.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key point. It's one logo.
Yeah. One logo, right? So I'm okay with whichever one you choose.
And then we can either say individuals, yes or no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what happened the last time.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sort of.
so we have a motion on the floor,
So
moved
we
and
still
seconded.
don't really have, the deputy mayor, I think, was basically asking the rest
So
of you.
let's provide clarity to staff around whether we want the public participation process to come back to council for approval or not. Because I think that will give staff the ability to be able to move on that, please.
I think it should, but that's, this is the document that is going to engage the citizens, that's going to garner their input, that's going to result in the expenditure of up to $25,000, that's going to result in a new logo going to be chosen. I think it is abandoning our responsibility as council to just go over to you. Let us know what you decide. Councillor Carver and then Deputy CAO.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Based on the discussion that we've had already, I don't really need for that public participation process to come back to council. And it's a community-led process. We made that decision. And there it is.
Okay.
And does this require a separate vote, this question?
I think the motion that we're technically in discussion on had a summary of council's amendment direction to staff. I think the mover and seconder can make it clear whether this motion does or does not include that, so that everybody else could, in voting on the motion, understand whether this motion includes the notion that the public participation is coming back to council or does not include that notion. So you were the mover, I don't.
And my understanding was that it would not come back to council. That was my.
Before we ask the clerk to reread the motion, you have a comment or a question?
I was just gonna comment on the $25,000 number. That's the number for the development. That's an estimated number for the cost of the contract to do this work. Really, the expenditure will be much higher by the time we get new business cards, letterheads, envelopes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, it's all post.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify that.
This is to a decision, not to, yeah.
Right, so that a year from now, when someone's looking back and saying, the motion said, right, they were talking about 25,000, that is specifically for the contract.
Okay. Read the motion.
That council directs staff to amend the draft engagement plan to reflect council's discussion regarding the steering team and use of town resources, as well as include a draft terms of reference and criteria for membership of a co-chaired limited time steering team to oversee the development of a community logo.
That's the motion.
Did I miss it? Was there anything in there regarding the public participation?
The council directs staff to amend the draft, public engagement plan, sorry.
So the question was,
Public participation.
how are we reflecting council's discussion concerning allocation of town resources? So from my perspective, that's what we're talking about, allocation of town resources. Can they go out and expend resources to undertake a public participation process without coming back to council, or do they have to come back to council? So the way Mo has written it is fine if everyone understands that the discussion was reflective of that, but you could also be super explicit in the motion if that is preferred, like the mover and seconder can say that you just add a couple of words to Mo's description there. So it says, with respect to council discussion around use of town resources, and can just say, including the committee's discretion or concluding the steering team's discretion to expend funds for public engagement processes and development of logo designs. I mean, those are the two things that we're talking about giving the committee discretion to expend funds for.
That's what, as the deputy CIO just said, the $25,000 is for the contractor only, but it's not going to cover the additional expenses of cookies for meetings or the extra expenses that might be involved.
In May, there's an RFP, we won't know what the costs are.
In advertising.
No, I think you were referring to your own paraphernalia that use the logo.
The town's information, but Councilor Carver makes a wonderful point. You can't have a public meeting in the home bay without cookies. You just can't. Cookies, coffee, tea, milk.
Yeah, I think we may need to amend the reference to 25,000, to make it clear that this is the budget being given over to the committee with this purpose. You know, clearly they're gonna expend the funds in this purpose, and if that purpose includes them having a meeting and that meeting being located at the Mahone Bay Center and having to rent a room, or like, those are I think we're giving them a budget, is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because I'd suggest that, like, we have no idea what the RFP will come back with.
For the professional design.
Yeah, the highs, and the facilitation of the, the engagement. I mean, I think we'll have multiple contractors doing those two different separate and distinct functions.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, if it's 24,900, okay, and if it's 25,100, okay.
Yeah, if it's over
Yeah.
25,000, there would be a need to come back to
Yeah.
council for
Of course.
approval, so that's kind of where it serves as a cap.
But there's.
Councillor Kerr.
Two things. One is that essentially what we're doing is giving the community steering team a grant. Usually there's a grant application. We're sort of doing things backwards. Usually there would be a grant application with a budget, a proposed budget that the community group has developed before the granting organization releases the money. So I'm just commenting that this is a little bit backwards in a way. We're talking about approving that money without any accountability yet for how it's going to be spent. So that's an argument for bringing back the whole community process to council. If
I
it's,
think the accountability is in the appointment of the committee members.
And the two councilors who are there as
Yeah.
stewards.
yeah, well, I'm just making the comment, it's a little bit different from other procedures where $25,000 is being given out. Usually they're in the application, there is a budget that people are proposing.
But they would, in that case, self-select. So like a group of people come together and they'd ask council for money. In this case, we've got the money and we're going to bring a group of people together. So I guess that's also the difference.
This is different. And could we go back to the question of whether or not we want whether council wants the community engagement process, a proposal to come back for council approval? Because I think I had understood when I made the motion that the feeling around the table was that it wouldn't need to come back for council approval. But maybe we can sort of do a little straw vote and see.
I mean, so there's an appropriation made for this project, this initiative. And there'll certainly be a requirement to come back if we need more than $25,000 to facilitate the end, the end deliverable. So, I mean, there are going to be checks and balances where I'm sure there'll be reports back. It's just, I don't think it has to come back for ratification though.
Deputy Mayor.
So one of the realizations is that two of us will be on that committee. So I think it would be very difficult for two of us to go into a committee of steering team and go rogue and decide, well, we're just going to spend council money. Yeah, so in many ways, I think for me, that accountability piece is already embedded in the fact that two of us will be going into it, and the two of us will be going into it, will be providing leadership to ensure that that process actually is sticking by what we really want delivered by that process. I think we want to ensure that we have a logo that will not come back to us in another iteration, and that the community feels that they've been involved in this process. And I think the two folks who get together in that committee, they have a huge task, but it's also a process of ensuring that we can rectify what folks feel didn't go right. So I am quite comfortable not bringing back a public participation component, because we say that at the end of the day, we want the logo to come back to council and council will approve. And so in many ways, we're sort of thinking about it from an outcome-based management kind of piece. You're not, rather than focusing on process management, you're thinking about the outcome. The outcome we want is a good community logo, and then trusting the community to come up with it. And this is, from my perspective, the way to do it, and ensuring that we're not, yes, we're giving it to you, but we still want to keep you tied in. If we just allow them to go through that process, trusting that to do what.
I don't think that it has to come back to council for approval. It'd be nice as the process proceeds, that we get updates.
Yeah.
At council.
Okay,
So the motion that I made assumes that the public engagement process does not need to come back for approval of
for
council.
the process to be approved.
Does not need to come back. to
Okay.
council.
Did you have a comment?
No, fine.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. On the question, is it all done? All in favor? And I'm opposed, so there's one opposed and the rest are in favor.
I didn't want to make the discussion on the motion any more complicated, but I'm just gonna make one more plea. Can you talk about criteria, since we're being asked to draft terms of reference? We're gonna have to put it in there, which means that we're just gonna have to make it up. Go by Joe, this is the only one who's commented on it. Do we want any restrictions around membership for people who are residents or not? Do we want any sort of, people who have a graphic design background or people who have a public engagement background, or like, do we want any of that in the terms of reference? I just want to get your thoughts. It's not final. We're just bringing back the draft.
Councillor Knight?
We'll have something to base it on.
I just think that we should open it up to the greater Mahone Bay area. The outlying areas around us. They have a stake in this too. We get a lot of.
No, we don't.
So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right,
but anyway, I think that, if there's somebody there that's qualified to help us out, same as we did with the other one, I think we should open it up so that they could be part of the.
Councillor Kerr.
I would support limited opening. There's 7 members on the committee, 2 of whom are councillors. So of the 5 community members, I would say absolutely not more than 2 from outside of the town limits. Maybe even only 1.
That's reasonable.
And with the proviso that some expertise or that's all I can say. A limit.
Okay. Anyone?
Yeah, so
Councillor
I agree with that, Lily. Yeah, but we remember that the names will come to us. We will get to pick who gets into the committee, and so in many ways we get to determine in some way, shape, or form. I appreciate the need for I guess more criteria, but we shouldn't make it too strict so that we to a certain extent we tie ourselves up. I guess front loading what we want to see. There are people out there who might have skill set that we can't envision in the process, and so.
And I really would genuinely wonder if we want people to have specific expertise or not. I mean, if the purpose of the committee is, or the steering team is to just be members of the public, do we want to say we prefer any particular kind of experience? Maybe we don't. Maybe the best thing is people who have who on a jury of people who know nothing about anything. That's what we do with jury selection.
Councillor Bird?
I think the fact that it exists will invite people into who are interested, and those who are like, I don't know if this is something I would participate in, they won't send their names in. So I agree that we don't need a lot of constrictions there.
Just ask people to tell us why they're in.
Why? Yeah, why it's good.
Okay.
Okay, we don't need another motion, just like have something to go by for that original draft, and we'll look at it next meeting.
All right, let's go to 6.4, Solar Garden Stormwater Management Plan.
So, Mr. Mayor, this is the inclusion of a few steps as they're laid out in the background here that enabled us to present this stormwater management plan for the community solar garden. It's something we committed to do. It's not something that's required under the land use bylaw, but it's something we had committed to do in consideration of impacts on neighboring properties. And it is presented here as a draft. And the recommendation is that council would approve this stormwater management plan as presented. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Councillor Wilson,
So moved.
seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question.
Yeah, I just had one question. I think on section 2, I haven't heard time with the document, section 2 in the detailed document, which I think was well crafted, under the goals, which I think is really well done, actually. The bullet point that says ensure post-development stormwater runoff conditions does not exceed pre-existing conditions. is the key theme of the document that I take away when I read it, like as a non-engineer. And so I think that as the goal, it should be, we should just make sure that's the story, that's all of our understanding. And I was really happy to see that verbiage laid out so clearly, because I thought we'd be hunting for that. So I was really pleased to see that bullet points. I think it's crystal clear what the goal and objective of the plan is. And to me, that's the most salient point in the document.
Okay. Anything else on the question, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I'm still trying to find it, but the summary it made references to heavy metals. Trying to find exactly where that was.
Yeah, it was on page 4 of the report, section 6, second last picture. Said reducing the water speed allows vegetation to filter rainwater, remove sediments and any heavy metals and hydrocarbons in the unlikely event that such existed historically on the site. So that verbiage is to make it clear that we're not adding any hydrocarbons or any heavy metals, but the vegetation, the purpose of vegetation is in part to filter rainwater. So that's one of the benefits of planting native vegetation, to filter the rainwater. But they kind of were careful to phrase it to say that it's not because there's particular, known heavy metals or anything. That was the reference.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to put that in there. But I guess that such existed historically in the site, I guess makes sense. But I was just remembering a meeting we had that made references to unsupported heavy, I guess, evidence of solar gardens and solar installations like that. And so these would, to a certain extent, be feeding into that. So I don't know whether that.
I had the same thought when I read it at first, but I think that the intention here was to provide generic language around the benefit of having vegetation for filtering. And I would let the engineers do their thing at this point. I've done this so much.
Okay. Again, on the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the staff report on the municipal boundary review.
Forgive me, Mayor, I just forgot to ask a question about distribution and sharing of that management plan with
With the families,
yeah,
5 families?
that have been in touch with us.
Sounds good, Godfather.
We had indicated way back when they originally approached us in January, in our first correspondence back to them in February, that we would share this document when it was approved. So I'm sure that Maureen will let Martha know, and she'll let everyone know, send them the copy of it.
And it is in the minutes, or it is in the tonight's.
Yeah, certainly the general public will
Well,
also have
yeah.
it now.
Yeah.
And we will add it to the website section where we've been putting the approved documentation around the project. But just for the extra outreach, we will
With the
also
passes.
send it to the neighboring copy.
Good idea. Okay, boundary review.
All right, so this is an ongoing process, and many of you remember it from last time around as well. Maureen has been a steward of this process, so I know she's been doing a lot to educate people around, what is the boundary review? It's a horrible name, it's prescribed, so we don't get to pick that, but basically it's a process of evaluating the appropriate size council. And one of the things that is recommended in that process by the board who oversee this is that we would, as council, in order to be provocative, and it makes sense, because how are people going to react if we don't give them something to react to?
Us.
Would put out there a suggestion about what council thinks the appropriate number of members would be. That could then be used to encourage additional participation in that final discussion session that we're now thinking is not going to happen until September. Maureen, do you want to add anything in introducing that? Did I?
No, that's pretty good, except for the fact that, yes, we've definitely been delayed with the ability to have that public meeting, but at this point, I think September is the way to go, because we know that this is a time of year that people are visiting, have visitors. Since I moved home to Nova Scotia, I have more summer visitors because everyone else says, oh, she lives by the water.
Let's
She
go
lives
down there.
Right,
Yeah.
so I think it's a better time to hold off until the fall at this point. Hopefully have a better opportunity for people to participate. But yes, as the CAO noted, this is a recommendation of the Utility and Review Board that when we go through this process, before we go to the media public consultation, that council declare the preferred size.
Mhm.
That does not mean that will be council's recommendation at the end, because council will make their recommendation to their application to the Utility and Review Board following the public consultation. But a declaration of preferred size now is to, as the CAO said, give people something to consider and react to. The report does include the results of the survey that we already ran, asking people what they think.
Which does favor, if it's a small number of respondents, but they did
Yeah.
favor the existing.
And do the survey respondents that are counted in the question 1 and 2, does that not include the one that is not a resident of Mahone Bay?
One person did not confirm that they are a resident of Mahone Bay, but yes, all of the information there includes all 29 respondents. We can confirm that 28 of them have declared themselves residents of Mahone Bay. One was an unclear response. So that said, the difference is pretty
Minimal.
great. So
Councillor Carver.
I'm prepared to make the motion that council declare that the preferred size of council is 6 councillors plus a mayor for the purpose of public consultation prior to preparing an application to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board for the municipal boundary review. I'll leave the other one for somebody else to do.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Carver, Deputy Mayor? And is that a
And a
question?
question, yeah. So I've always been curious about the 6 number. I know
Anyone have a seconder for the motion?
I have.
He seconded it.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'll confess that from my perspective, I think we should have a lesser number. Because one, there will be savings for the town, and secondly, maybe it might address the issue of what is that process when you do affirmations, because you have a low number of folks relative to the seats, because I think it's called affirmation. Acclamation. I think that might reduce chances of acclaimed councils going forward if we have a smaller number. But I will defer to folks who've been at this table, have had this conversation before, sort of educate me on why the 6 is much better than.
And it consistently is the preference of the citizens when they have been engaged and had the opportunity to comment. The same thing comes up. Clerk and then Councillor Carver.
As someone who's not elected, I might be in a better position to respond to what we've heard in the past, is that, as you say, that is, there's a response for each way this goes. As you say, maybe that, maybe if we have acclamations, maybe seeking fewer people makes a better opportunity to avoid acclamations. If you only have 6 people that will put their hand up, if you only need 4, maybe that's still an opportunity to engage in an election process. The reverse of that is with fewer people, the committee work gets spread thinner, and then fewer people, maybe fewer people would come forward. Maybe this is maybe more people are an opportunity to increase the diversity of voices around the table. Maybe fewer people make it more efficient to make decisions. So as the mayor said, the last 2 times that this went forward, not the most recent time, the time before that, I believe, your worship, the recommendation was to go to 4, but The response from the community was to stick with 6. And in the last process, I was here for that. The recommendation of council based on the previous experience was to go with 6. And that was supported by the public engagement. So did that answer? It comes down to what do they hear from the public, but there's always a flip for every side. So it comes down to what the public has to say.
And there was a situation where council went to 4 and a mayor, and citizens appealed to the UARB, and they overturned it, said, no, you really should have 6 councilors and a mayor. CAO?
And just,
Oh, sorry, Councilor Carter.
All the things that I was gonna say have been covered now.
Okay, thank you. CAO?
Just to add to Maureen's point, just in my own personal experience, because I've worked with a number of different councils, and when I was with Shelburne, they actually did make a decision to reduce the council from 6 and a mayor to 4 and a mayor. And that decision was in part prompted by having had elections with acclamation. The election after that had 13 people seeking those 5 positions. So I guess it just depends what's going on around the town, and people get interested or they don't. I think you got to do more to have an engaged electorate, and you won't have to worry about acclamations, would be my suggestion. But I personally, my experience has been the dynamic of a group having discussions and making decisions. This is a remarkable difference between 5 people and 7. Like if one of 5 people is absent, the group suddenly becomes almost hamstrung in its ability to make decisions, because you need a 3-to-1 majority of the remaining 4 members. And the feeling that somebody's not in the room is much more palpable as well, I guess we better hold these items because we've only got 4 people. It's easier for consensus to form that might exclude a minority opinion. So, I think in my own personal experience, 7 or 6 and a mayor is a practical number for continuing to have effective decision making, regardless of the questions of representativeness or some of the other questions that were raised.
Okay. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to,
Second motion.
the second motion. Yes, indeed, there is. I turned that screen off. Let me come back to us.
I'd like to move now. The council directs staff to schedule a public meeting in September for public consultation to inform council's application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board for the municipal boundary review.
Second? Okay. On the question. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you for reminding us. Committee reports, the Policy and Strategy Committee. The draft minutes are attached. There is a motion in the minutes. Comments or questions on the draft minutes? None? Yes, clerk.
Your worship, I just wanted to.
You need a sign, it says clerk, CAO, up there it is. I can't see that.
Just to note that normally Policy and Strategy Committee meeting minutes come with a motion to declare the next agenda, but that motion was made at a previous council meeting. So the next agenda has already been set by a previous council agenda. So that's why there's only the one motion with these minutes that comes from discussion.
Okay,
And likewise, this motion is also taking a step ahead to set the agenda for the following meeting in September.
Yes.
Councilor Wilson.
I'd just like to move that the council review the draft surveillance policy for comment prior to a discussion of the policy at the September 26, 2022 meeting of the Policy and Strategy Committee.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Carver.
And just to clarify, I think the staff action here is that we just send it out again, make sure everybody has it. We already had done it.
On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. And as you can see there, the next meeting of the Policy Strategy Committee is July 25th, upcoming. And the discussion will be on council policy and the committee policy. Okay. let's go to item 8.2, the Heritage Advisory Committee.
Mayor, just one item of note, the committee did have a chance to review the recording of Deborah Trask's talk regarding the development of our town. And I understand from staff that that talk is now widely available on YouTube, on the town's YouTube channel. And recommend everybody take a look. And I think they'll be favorably impressed by Deborah's presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Feeney.
Since we're plugging stuff anyway, if you like that, we still have copies of our centennial book that covers much of the same territory in more depth.
Are they on sale yet?
They're still on sale. They're-
No, I mean at a discounted price.
But we're the government, we don't put things on sale.
Okay. Well,
May I?
yes, Councillor
At the
Carter.
risk of going a little bit sideways here, I do have a question about an item in the Heritage Advisory Committee minutes. And it's number 6 about heritage districts. Where one member of the committee presented a plan to do a research project and public engagement involvement about the public's interest in looking at heritage districts as part of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. And I'm just wondering about how to understand that particular proposal in terms of the terms of reference of the committee and how that works. It's that. So I'm just putting it out as a question.
I believe the item was referred to the committee by the land use bylaw development committee. That's how it showed up there, out of a similar overlap of membership. But I think that the reason why that item was brought forth for further discussion within the HAC was directly driven by a motion from the.
I don't think it was direction, I think it was just discussion that people were present for.
From the steering committee, the steering team?
Yeah, I think that was the takeaway that we said we would take it, we would take it away and take a look at it and talk about it. So that's what's up.
CAO.
But to Councillor Carver's point though, if the Heritage Committee, since we'll discuss this further in the next meeting, if they decide that it's worth recommending to council that something be done in terms of public engagement around this piece, that would still have to be a recommendation to council. Like the
Right.
committee's not going to go out and begin a public engagement process. And I think that's the key thing, because the council, as undertaking the broader redevelopment of our land use bylaw, understands the interconnection of those two things. And I think would almost definitely, not to be your decision at that time, but want to see it coordinated into the plan of home day engagement as opposed to a separate concurrent process, which I think would be very confusing for people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I mean, hopefully the members here, chair, will reflect that at the committee's next meeting, so everybody knows where.
Yeah, I think it's.
I do take your point, Councillor Carver. I have been concerned for some time now about committees that that a member of a committee will take it upon themselves to discuss a topic that is important to them, but is not particularly germane to the intent of the committee of council, nor has council asked that committee to investigate the issue. And I was talking with the CAO recently about opportunities, and at the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, when we talk about committee's policy, it may be an opportunity to discuss some kind of a statement there that would control more so that situation of people introducing private issues in committee discussions.
It helped also to be reminded that the steering team from the plan review project
Yeah.
have invited the Heritage Advisory Committee to be included in that discussion.
Okay,
Just for clarification.
Deputy CAO clerk.
There we go. That was discussion, it wasn't from the steering team, it was from discussion around the strategic plan. Just the community members that brought it forward coincidentally are on the planning advisory committee.
It's a small town, so
Yeah.
coincidentally, there's a lot of overlap.
And that's why we have 6 counselors. 'cause we
Yeah,
have to
sure.
vote all these meetings.
Yeah, well,
And if it's not the member, it's their spouse or, you know, so.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Anything else? Councilor Wilson's got that, no, it's cooler than 9 look on his face.
No, I think you're doing great. You're only 6 minutes over the record.
Any folks watching it from home?
there are currently 11 people watching, so.
11?
Is this, but there are no questions.
Okay, let's remind the folks at home that they can type the question in the box. And we'll give them a minute or so to do that, just in case, before we seek a motion to adjourn.
Give everybody a chance to go to the Town of Home Bay YouTube channel.
Yeah, that reminds me, I didn't get an alert about it, so Deborah's video is posted on our channel. Yeah, I'm a subscriber. We can get an alert about that.
And
A
we-
lot of complaints people have been having about YouTube lately, not giving alerts about certain
Mhm.
things. The algorithm is suppressing. I think we're getting suppressed by YouTube's algorithm here.
It might have been useful to have a code red alert to remind us about the water shut off.
We did one last week.
I know, but I mean, you know, this is a sieve, right?
Did you check off the bell?
One today to kind of remind, or, you know, the day of, that it's coming that night. Because last week, who knows?
Someone's promoting that I can join the live stream right now. I don't have any questions.
Yeah, that's your-
Do we pay per, we don't pay per code red message, do we? No, okay.
123 views on Deborah's video in 9 hours. That's pretty good.
Est-ce que
Yeah.
nous avons des questions? No? Well, thank you, citizens, for choosing to stay with us for this meeting. And council entertain a motion to adjourn. Councilor Wilson moves, Councilor Now seconds, all in favor, we're out of here. Good night, everyone.
Did you beat the deputy mayor's record?